My friends, nobody's talking about this, but the Russian army just launched a major offensive all along the Luhansk front. Put simply, the latest Russian breakthrough could become extremely critical for Ukraine. Now the Russians are dangerously approaching the strategic city of Kupiansk. And if nothing is done, Ukrainian forces positioned on the east bank of the Uskal River could get cut off and encircled. One more thrust and it's GG, well played.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Here you witness Russian infantrymen advancing with determined resolve, pressing the attack on the enemy strongholds with relentless force. Outmanned and outgunned, the local Ukrainian territorial defense unit guarding the sector could not do much to stop them. It's so bad that even the elite Ukrainian brigade Azov explained the situation as one of the most intense areas of the enemy's offensive. At this moment, the Ukrainian command is trying to scramble as many reinforcements as possible to plug the gap. Throughout July, Russian mechanized units surge on countless villages in Luhansk like Stelmachivka, Makivka, Andrivka, Sinkivka, Stepova Novoselivka, and a couple days ago, the first Russian tank army launched a direct spearhead and captured the village of Pischane. They broke through and now relentlessly penetrate deeper and deeper into Ukrainian rears. Mr. President, we got screwed real bad here, and here. In other words, the collapse of these Ukrainian positions could mark the final chapter of the Luhansk front, and thus the beginning of the second battle of Kupiansk. Mainstream media, Russia may be running out of tanks. Reality. Ukraine's commander-in-chief admits since 2022, the number of Russian tanks has doubled. What I find funny is how Forbes openly mocked the capabilities of this Russian armored grouping operating on the Luhansk front. They reported Russia's first tank army has won its first battle in 2 years by advancing a mile and capturing a half-dozen buildings. They completely downplayed the threat posed by all these armored and motorized regiments. And now this first tank army is charging straight for the gates of Kupiansk. Everyone knows the grey clouds are approaching the strategic city. On the 20th of July, the city's website reported, for the first time, the occupiers dropped a bomb weighing 1,500 kilograms on the center of Kupiansk. It's just a matter of time before Ukrainian troops engage in brutal house-to-house fighting in order to salvage Kupiansk. Yet another urban warfare meat grinder for the Ukrainian army. Without even talking about logistics problems the Ukrainian army will soon face, since all the bridges over the Uskal River constantly get bombarded by Russian aviation. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Before going all in, we have to start with some foreplay. Since the summer of 2023, we talked many times about the Luhansk front and the countless Russian operations meant to break through towards the Uskal River. The Russian army tried again and again. That was the front on May 1st, 2023, and that was the front line on June 1st, 2024.
Not great, not terrible.
We also talked about the possibility of a Russian offensive towards Liman, which would open the road towards Slavyansk. But due to the strategic nature of this town, the Ukrainian command extremely fortified this region and sent numerous reinforcements to counterattack any Russian gains, such as shock units of the elite 3rd Assault Brigade Azov in Terny. However, as you know, Russians, Ukrainians, they're very stubborn. If something doesn't work 8 times, what do? That's right, they try 9 times. Mid-June 2024, the party ends as Ukrainian intelligence officers spotted a significant concentration of enemy forces around Svatove. Enemy columns kept converging towards the city, and the Ukrainians noticed an increased activity in this sector, with the Russian forces conducting more and more probing attacks to find weak points and gaps between Ukrainian trench bastions. Pro-Ukrainian deep state UA even admitted the level of military management of the Russians has somewhat increased. In the end, this says that the Russian 20th Army gathered 10,000 soldiers from the 3rd and 144th Divisions, plus 450 armored vehicles and artillery pieces as strike fists for a major offensive. Ukrainian commanders understood that all this fisting could get uncomfortable real quick. And to add to this, on the 18th of June, the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov wrote the following on their telegram. The enemy is intensifying attacks to reach the borders of the Luhansk region. Because of this factual statement, Azov has been heavily criticized by countless Ukrainian journalists. And guess what? They were right. This is exactly what happened. Almost. The Ukrainian command waited and waited for this much anticipated Russian offensive towards Borova. And all of a sudden, on the 30th of June, the front flared up. A large Russian mechanized formation charged and reached the outskirts of Stelmachivka. However, as you can see in these images, the Ukrainians were ready and the Russians met a storm of steel. Here you can even see some damaged vehicles in the open.
Our men flee the battlefield!
The Ukrainian command popped champagne thinking it was mission accomplished. When on the 6th of July, out of nowhere, Russian assault detachments stormed Pischane and advanced almost 4 kilometers within a day. They completely shoved away the Ukrainian 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade holding the sector and at once controlled the southern part of the settlement. At that point, I think the Russian command faced 3 options. Number 2, attack right in the center and cross 4 kilometers in open terrain using their armored vehicles towards Pischane. Or option 3, advance across these 2 fields and storm Berestove. You see, the Russian command tricked the Ukrainians by carrying recon missions all along this front, making it super obvious, only to pull in Uno and attack 15 kilometers to the north. Diversion, main attack, once again the masters of Maskirovka.
Again!
As a reminder, in late May the Russians had already taken control of Berestove. To be honest, I felt that the Russians would do something in this sector, but I thought they would attack northwards to cut off these Ukrainian forces. But perhaps that was also the most obvious move. So by the 6th of July, they now control the southern half of Pischane. We can even get a glimpse as to how the Russians launched this surprise attack from a tactical level. The assault was swift and extremely coordinated. Unlike what some people tell you regarding meat wave attacks. It was even preceded by demining engineering equipment like this 40-ton Bat vehicle. In this Ukrainian drone footage, we see 5 Russian armored vehicles, which then take a sharp left turn. Then we see them drive right along this tree line. Now you see the field in the back to their left. It's purple. Now because of that, we know where this mechanized column attacked from. They probably departed from Krochmalne along this tree line, took a left turn, and then pushed inside this gap in the tree line. After that, they drove along this tree line towards Pischane, with the purple fields to their left. In the next frame, right at this spot, we see what seems to be 4 Russian armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned. But the video is also a bit misleading because it stops right there. We don't know if some of these BMPs actually returned to the rear. On top of that, since we see Ukrainian mortars firing straight into the tree line, we can guess all the infantry component of this mechanized column actually managed to disembark and probably continue the assault by foot right along this tree line towards the village. Due to the urgent situation, I think the Ukrainians dispatched any available reserve units to counterattack and regain the lost ground. The reason I believe this is because we have evidence in the form of casualty reports of a variety of Ukrainian units that intervened to stop the Russian breakthrough. On the 6th of July, a company commander of the 116th Mechanized Brigade, Senior Lieutenant Pavel Klepak, was reported as KIA. 10 days later, on the 17th of July, Major Leonid Kuzmenko, the commander of the 115th Battalion of the 110th Territorial Brigade, was KIA near Pischane. Despite this battle of attrition, perhaps the Ukrainians believed that this positional fighting would stabilize the sector, just like it did many times in the past. The front did not move for the next 2 weeks, but this allowed the 1st Tank Army to muster its reinforcements and converge more and more assault detachments towards Pischane. It's also important to understand that the Russian command did not necessarily know exactly where the enemy front would break. They would send these probing attacks left and right to see where it cracks, all the while keeping the reserves at the rear. But once there is a gap, they go all in. On July 20th, Russian units advanced 700 meters inside the settlement. 2 days later, they pushed another 600 meters eastwards along the main road. By the 23rd of July, Ukraine had lost control of most of Piszczane. That's when the remaining defenders said, "GG, well played, time to get out." And the entire village fell into Russian hands. The seizure of the village was credited to the 15th Motorized Rifle Regiment, whose soldiers raised the Russian flag on the very symbolic World War II memorial dedicated to the fallen Soviet soldiers. As usual, they also raised the red banner. As a historical reminder, during World War II, the 1st Tank Army defended the northern sector at Kursk, pushed across Ukraine until reaching the Vistula River, and took part in the final assault on Berlin. Now, according to the latest news, 4 elements of the 1st Tank Army spearheaded this offensive towards the Oskol River, and are now only 6 kilometers away from reaching their objective. If spearhead detachments can continue the attack all the way up until Kolesnivka, they will have effectively cut off the Ukrainian front in two, with the Kupiansk grouping in the north and the Liman grouping in the south, whose troops will hardly be able to mutually support each other. All this would be very similar as to what the Russian armed forces went through in Kherson in the fall of 2022. And we know what happened next. Now, from a political perspective, the Russian military almost conquered the entire territorial boundaries of the Luhansk Oblast, one of the 2 regions of the rebel provinces of Donbass, meaning it will be the first oblast of the annexed regions to be fully under Russian control. On July 20th, the Russian grouping along the Luhansk front launched another attack vector further to the south, this time towards Andrivka. You might ask, why towards this random village? Because if we look at it on a 3D map, we see that this place offers a bridge and a smooth crossing across the Zherebiets River. If the Russians manage to secure this crossing, this is going to be yet another breachhead from where the Russians could launch a new offensive or plan their next moves. However, before the 1st Tank Army will be able to charge towards the river, it will be imperative to secure the flanks and deal with enemy positions north and south of the salient. Otherwise, the Ukrainians could counterattack and encircle countless Russian units, just like the Germans did so often to the Soviets on the Eastern Front. And according to the latest news on the 26th of July, Russian assault detachments expanded the girth of the area of control with an attack north of Piszczane by advancing another 2 kilometers.
Another fuck up. Another fuck up.
In a way, the successful push towards Piszczane was partly due to the fact that Ukraine's best brigades were pinned down to the north to counter Russian moves against the settlement of Sinkivka. Equally as strategic in the sector is the village of Sinkivka. So let's start with the biggest threat for Ukraine, the Battle of Sinkivka. As you can see on the map, the village is located 6 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk. Sinkivka. As you've seen, I covered this settlement many times. This goes to show how strategic this position actually is. Yet the Russian army proved to be utterly incapable of capturing Sinkivka. No jokes, you just have to whisper the word Sinkivka to any Russian general and he will have the worst nightmares. It got so bad that in the winter the Russian headquarters even fired the 2 commanders-in-chief in charge of the battle for their incompetence. And now the Russians decided to just bypass the village altogether. One way would be to push to the west. The problem for the attacking force is this massive forested area, since it cancels Russian firepower and the benefits of mechanized units. Option 2 is to attack on the eastern side of Sinkivka, but the Russians already attacked there many times and each time got a bloody nose. Eventually the Russians broke the deadlock on the 22nd of June, when they stormed and captured these 2 tree lines. This one 500 meters long and this one 800 meters long. 2 weeks later, by the 7th of July, they had cleared this tree line, stormed this other one, and in the end secured this 1 square kilometer potato field.
A great success!
But unlike in the past, they managed to keep momentum going. 2 days later, on July 9th, Russian artillery managed to take out key Ukrainian mortar positions, which allowed the infantry to attack along this entire 1 kilometer long tree line just east of Sinkivka. Overall, all along this sector, the Ukrainians have lost the bulk of the tree lines on this first line of defense. Of course, the Ukrainians mustered their reserves concentrated in Petropavlivka, but some of them seem to have been halted, like this T-72M1 that was destroyed by an FPV drone near this Petropavlivka. Russian artillery also zeroed in on this town on the outskirts of Kupiansk and hammered any building that was thought of sheltering troops or storing ammunition. With that being said, it's just a matter of time before Ukrainian forces will have to abandon these two sectors, as they're completely surrounded. They will have no other choice but to fall back to the second line of defense, which is already supported by a third line of defense 1 kilometer to the rear along this other tree line. Yet Sinkivka remains the stone in the shoe. Now, to hasten the fall of the city, the Russian artillery bombarded over and over the settlement of Sinkivka. In this video, we even see 5 Ukrainian riflemen running away from this building in ruins towards some bastion and entrenched positions. Meanwhile, around Liman Pershi, in this forested area I mentioned earlier, both sides simply exchange artillery fire. Here it's the Ukrainians that bombarded the Russians, and in this one the Russian 1486 Motor Rifle Regiment launched a Grad rocket barrage on the enemy. What's interesting is around the same day, the 1486 Motor Rifle Regiment was awarded by presidential decree the honorary title Guards for Mass Courage and Heroism. As a reminder, this regiment is the one that stopped the Ukrainian counterattack in Bakhmut in May 2023. I believe it's also noteworthy to mention that on the 18th of July, Russian forces managed to advance 500 meters south of Stepova Novoselivka, inching their way towards this settlement. Although it might not sound impressive, Al Pacino explained it best.
The inches we need are everywhere around us. Hell yeah. We claw with our fingernails for that inch.
A couple days later, on the 23rd of July, a Ukrainian M113 APC was destroyed right here on the map, thus hindering Ukrainian rotations around the settlement. I also feel the Russians could launch an attack from the north, along this 1.5 kilometer long tree line, which will help them encircle the settlement and force its defenders out. So, let's summarize. Airstrikes on critical bridges over the Oskol River, spearhead towards Pischane, flanking maneuver of Sinkivka, probing attacks near Andrivka, and as part of this major offensive, the Russians now even attacked Makivka. However, in my opinion, the most lethal Russian attack would be against Makivka, but the Russians could flank enemy positions from Novovodyane towards Petrivske. It seems the Russians are trying to storm this hilltop on the west bank of the Zherebiets River, which would allow them to flank the village of Makivka from the north. At the end of June, the Russian command also decided to activate the southern part of the Luhansk front. Truth be told, the attack towards Liman had failed, the attack towards Terny had also failed, so it was time to bypass these positions altogether. On the 28th of June, Russian assault detachments advanced on a 6-kilometer front with a maximum depth of 1,000 meters. Literally just the tip. However, this was enough for the Ukrainians to send some of their reserves in that direction. And boom! That's when the Russians pushed towards Makivka with 2 regiments. Now put yourself in the shoes of the Ukraine command. You don't know which attack is a diversion, a feint, or the main assault. So your best bet as a Ukraine commander is just to counterattack and eliminate this threat as fast as possible. The assault was so successful that they captured this entire 2.5 kilometer tree line all the way to the Zherebiets River. The next day they expanded their area of control, and again by the 6th of July. By the footage we got from the Ukrainian side, we see how the Russians attacked using infiltration tactics, with small fire teams of riflemen pushing forward. And because of this video, we also know that this sector was defended by yet another territorial defense brigade, this time the 107th. I mean, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Just like in the other parts of the front, the Ukrainian command started scrambling for reserve units that could counterattack. The International Legion seems to have been one of the first units sent straight into the flames of battle, much like firefighters rushing into a blaze. The battle was fierce. Ukrainian artillery fired cluster munitions round after round at advancing enemy units, who benefited from the cover and camouflage of all these trees. On the 9th of July, Australian volunteer Brock Greenwood lost his life, and a couple days later, one of his comrades as well, a volunteer from Poland. Tomasz Marcin Senkala, born on September 1st, 2001. Same birthday as me. Tomasz joined the International Legion of Ukraine in the fall of 2023 and fell on the 13th of July somewhere around Makivka. As of now, at least 7 Australians and 15 Poles have been reported as KIA as part of the International Legion. Very far from the hundreds and thousands claimed by the Russian Ministry of Defense. By the 13th of July, forward elements of the Russian army snatched the southern half of Makivka from the International Legion. And we know this because of this footage, where Russian riflemen took position inside this building just to be zeroed in and Ctrl-Alt-deleted by Ukrainian artillery. And the problem I have with Ukrainian videos is that they always show you these videos of them eliminating Russian troops, but they don't say that they actually lost all this territory. The Ukrainian drone operators then added the sentence, "The occupier decided to escape into space, but forgot he is a pig and not a falcon." Very poetic, true Ukrainian poetry. At last, by the 18th of July, the Russian army activated yet another attack vector and pushed 2 kilometers towards Nevsky. This certainly means the Russian army has a plan to push towards the Zherebiets River. From Makivka they can push south, and another grouping could perhaps push through these forested areas as a stepping stone to take Nevsky. The analysis of the situation on the Luhansk front would not be complete without covering the events taking place in and around the Siversk salient. We talked about the settlement in my last video. On the 19th of July, the village of Razdolivka finally fell into Russian hands. Ukraine's fallback position was this 2.7 kilometer tree line north of the settlement. But it seems it's already GG, well played, as Russian assault detachments are already storming all these Ukrainian positions. We even got this footage from the 23rd of July. Russian armored vehicles pushed into the exposed no man's land, laying in front of them, with demining vehicles ahead of the column. After passing through the minefield, the BMPs dispersed and rained fire on enemy positions at point blank. The Ukrainian defenders must have been horrified as the BMPs closed in. That's when Russian infantrymen took enemy trenches by storm. All this to say that if the Russians captured the town of Siversk, it could break the deadlock on the southern Luhansk front and allow them to attack towards Liman. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.